If you've never had a confession delivered to your door wrapped in caramel and tied with a silk ribbon, count yourself fortunate. It's the kind of thing that sounds charming until you realize someone has taken the trouble to encode their guilt in sugar, which suggests either a profound sense of theater or a complete detachment from reality. On that particular Thursday morning in May, when the doorbell announced such a delivery to the brownstone on West 35th Street, I discovered it could be both. The messenger was already disappearing around the corner by the time I reached the front door, leaving behind only a white pastry box that bore the elegant gold script of Dubois Pâtisserie and weighed considerably more than its size suggested. I brought it into the hall and set it on the marble-topped table, resisting the urge to peek inside. In Nero Wolfe's house, curiosity is a luxury that requires permission, and at 10:30 in the morning, that permission was currently occupied with orchids 2 floors above. Archie. Fritz's voice drifted from the kitchen, warm with the contentment that comes from having 3 different sauces simmering simultaneously. Is that for the lunch? Not unless you've started ordering confessions with the groceries. I called back, which earned me the sound of Fritz's gentle laughter. When Fritz laughs, it usually means he's in the mood to solve the world's problems with butter and patience. More often than not, he's right. The box sat there looking innocent enough, but I'd learned to distrust innocent-looking packages. They had a tendency to contain either explosives or complications, and in my experience, complications were often more dangerous. I was still contemplating its potential for mischief when the elevator's familiar wheeze announced Wolfe's descent from his morning communion with the Cattleyas. He entered the office at precisely 11 o'clock, a man who moved with the deliberate economy of someone who understood that energy, like good wine, should never be wasted. At 1/7 of a ton, Nero Wolfe made even simple actions seem considered and final. He settled into his custom-built chair behind the desk, adjusted his bulk with the precision of a ship finding its moorings, and fixed his dark eyes on the white box I'd placed on the red leather client chair. "What?" he said, in the tone he reserved for interruptions to his schedule. "Is that?" "A delivery from Dubois Pâtisserie," I replied, settling behind my own desk. "Arrived 20 minutes ago. No return address, no accompanying note that I can see." Just this. I opened the box carefully, revealing what looked like a sheet of amber glass nestled in white tissue paper. It was caramel, but not the rough, homemade variety you might find at a county fair. This was a work of art, smooth as a mirror and clear as expensive whiskey, with words piped across its surface in elegant script that seemed to flow like silk. Ribbon. I confess I poisoned the Montclair competition. The victory was never mine to claim. Forgive me. A.D. Wolfe leaned forward, which for him constituted a dramatic gesture. He studied the caramel confession with the intensity he usually reserved for rare orchids or Fritz's soufflés. After a full minute of silence, he reached for the magnifying glass that lived on his desk like a faithful pet. "Extraordinary," he murmured, examining the piping. This was not done by machine. The pressure variations, the slight tremor in the final letters, this was piped by hand, and by someone under considerable emotional strain. The initials matched the pâtisserie, I observed. ID, Antoine Dubois, presumably. Presumably. Wolfe set down the magnifying glass and fixed me with a look that meant business was about to commence, whether I was ready or not. "Archie, you will telephone Dubois Pâtisserie and arrange for me to speak with Monsieur Antoine Dubois at 3 o'clock this afternoon. You will inform him that his confession has been received and requires clarification." Just like that? No fee discussion? No preliminary investigation? "The fee will be adequate," Wolfe said with the confidence of a man who had never met a problem that couldn't be solved with sufficient application of intellect and Fritz's cooking. "As for investigation, It has already begun. This confession was not intended for us, specifically. Note the lack of personal address. It was meant for someone else, someone who would understand the reference to the Montclair competition. We have received it by accident or by design, but either way, we now possess evidence of a crime. I was reaching for the telephone when it rang, as if on cue. The voice on the other end was cultured, with a slight French accent and the kind of tremor that suggested its owner hadn't slept well in several days. Mr. Wolfe's office? This is Antoine Dubois. I believe you may have received something that belongs to me. I covered the mouthpiece and looked at Wolfe, who nodded once. Mr. Dubois, this is Archie Goodwin. Mr. Wolfe would like to see you at 3 o'clock this afternoon. We have indeed received your communication. There was a long pause, filled with what sounded like a man trying to decide whether to run toward his problems or away from them. Yes, he said finally. Yes, I will come. But Mr. Goodwin, please tell Mr. Wolfe that what he has received is not the whole truth. It is only the beginning. The line went dead, leaving me with a dial tone and the distinct impression that our quiet Thursday was about to become considerably more complicated. I hung up and looked at Wolfe, who was still studying the caramel confession with the expression of a man who had just been presented with a particularly intriguing puzzle. He says it's only the beginning, I reported. Indeed, Wolfe carefully closed the pastry box, handling it with the respect due to evidence. Have Fritz prepare lunch for 4, Archie. I suspect Mr. Dubois will not be coming alone, and I prefer to conduct business on a full stomach. 4. Who's the 4th? Wolfe's smile was barely visible, but I'd learned to read it like a barometer. Whoever sent Mr. Dubois to us, of course. They've gone to considerable trouble to ensure we receive this confession. The least we can do is invite them to explain why. As I reached for the phone to call Fritz, I found myself wondering what kind of case began with poisoned pastry and caramel confessions. But that was the thing about working with Nero Wolfe. Just when you thought you understood the rules of the game, he revealed that everyone else had been playing checkers while he was already 3 moves ahead in chess. The confession written in caramel was just the opening gambit, and something told me the endgame was going to be anything but sweet. If you've ever tried to maintain dignity while your world crumbles around you like a poorly constructed soufflé, you'll understand the expression on Antoine Dubois' face when he arrived at our door at precisely 3 o'clock. He stood on the brownstone's front step with the rigid posture of a man who'd spent the morning rehearsing explanations that sounded reasonable in his head but foolish when spoken aloud. Beside him stood a young woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in Manhattan, including the subway during rush hour. Mr. Goodwin. Dubois extended a hand that trembled slightly, despite his obvious efforts at control. Antoine Dubois. This is Ana Delgado, my assistant. Ana Delgado was perhaps 28, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple black dress and carried herself with the careful precision of someone who'd learned early that the world notices when women make mistakes. Her handshake was firm, professional, and lasted exactly the appropriate length of time. Mr. Dubois, Ms. Delgado, please come in. I led them through the hall, noting how Dubois' eyes lingered on the orchid arrangements and the way Ms. Delgado catalogued exit routes with the unconscious efficiency of someone who'd needed them before. In the office, Wolfe was positioned behind his desk like a monument to intellectual authority. He inclined his head precisely 1/4 inch, his standard greeting for clients who hadn't yet proven themselves worthy of greater effort. Mr. Dubois, say Ms. Delgado. His voice filled the room without strain, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being heard. Please be seated. Dubois took the red leather chair, settling into it with the careful movements of a man trying not to disturb a house of cards. Ms. Delgado chose the yellow chair, sitting with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. Everything about her suggested competence held under tight control. "I assume," Wolfe continued, "you've come to discuss this." He opened the pastry box and revealed the caramel confession, its amber surface catching the afternoon light like trapped sunlight. Dubois stared at the confession as if it were a venomous snake. Mon Dieu. I prayed it had not actually been delivered. It was delivered, Mr. Dubois. The question is whether it was delivered as intended. Wolfe's dark eyes moved between his visitors with the patience of a chess master contemplating his opponent's inevitable mistakes. "You created this confession. Why?" "Because I'm guilty, Mr. Wolfe." Dubois' voice carried the weight of a man who'd been carrying a secret too heavy for his shoulders. "I poisoned the Montclair pastry competition. Not with chemicals, with something far worse. With lies." Ana Delgado shifted in her chair, and I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested this wasn't the first time she'd heard this confession. "Elaborate," Wolfe commanded. Dubois took a shaky breath. "The Montclair competition is the most prestigious pastry contest in North America. The winner receives $50,000 and a contract to supply the Montclair hotel chain, worth perhaps 10 times that amount. Last autumn, I was one of 3 finalists, along with Giselle Leclerc of Le Petit Four and Marcus Hoffman of Hoffman's Bakehouse, both exceptional pâtissiers, both more deserving of victory than I. Yet you won," I observed. "I won because I spread a lie." The words came out like a confession to a priest. 3 days before the final judging, I started a rumor that Giselle's kitchen had failed a health inspection. It was completely false. Her standards are impeccable. But the rumor spread through the culinary community like spilled wine through white linen. By the time of the competition, the judges had heard whispers. They judged her work more harshly, questioned her techniques, doubted her presentation. She placed 3rd. I placed 1st. Ana Delgado spoke for the first time since entering the office. "The rumor destroyed her reputation, Mr. Wolfe. She lost 3 major contracts within a month. Her restaurant closed 6 weeks later." Wolfe leaned back in his chair, a gesture that for him constituted dramatic emphasis. "And you felt compelled to confess this transgression in Caramel because I cannot live with the weight of it," Dubois said miserably. "Every success we've had since then feels stolen. Every compliment tastes like ash. I made this confession to send to Giselle as a private apology, but somehow it came here instead." "How did you intend to deliver it?" Ana Delgado answered. "I was supposed to take it to her apartment this morning. Antoine lost his nerve at the last minute and asked me to send it by messenger instead. I gave it to a courier service with her address clearly written. Yet it arrived here, addressed only to AD, with no specific recipient." Wolfe's fingers drummed once against his desk, a rare display of what passed for agitation in his universe. "Someone intercepted your confession and redirected it. The question is who and why." The doorbell's chime interrupted his contemplation. I excused myself and found a woman in her 50s standing on our stoop, dressed in an expensive gray suit and carrying herself with the authority of someone accustomed to having doors opened for her. She had silver hair styled in a perfect bob and eyes the color of winter sky. "Mr. Goodwin, I'm Muriel Brigham, director of the Montclair competition. I believe you have something that belongs to me." I showed her into the office, where her arrival created the kind of tension that makes furniture seem to lean away from the center of the room. Dubois went pale. Ana Delgado's hands tightened in her lap, and Wolfe's eyes took on the predatory gleam he reserved for moments when all the pieces of a puzzle suddenly began falling into place. "Miss Brigham," Wolfe said, not rising. "How fortuitous. We were just discussing your competition." She settled into the remaining chair with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her right to be anywhere she chose to be. Mr. Wolfe, I received an anonymous call this morning informing me that Antoine Dubois had confessed to sabotaging last year's competition. The caller suggested I might find evidence of this confession at your address. Anonymous calls are often illuminating, Wolfe observed. What did this caller sound like? A woman, cultured voice, slight accent, possibly French. She seemed to know a great deal about the competition and about Mr. Dubois' activities. Dubois looked like he wanted to disappear into the upholstery. Giselle, he whispered. She must have discovered the truth somehow. Perhaps, Wolfe said. Or perhaps someone else wishes us to believe that. Ms. Brigham, who else knew the details of Mr. Dubois' victory? Who had access to information about the judging process? The three judges, naturally. My assistant, Margaret Chen. The competition sponsors, there are 4 of them, and of course, the other finalists and their staff. A considerable number of people, Wolfe noted, any of whom might have discovered Mr. Dubois' deception and chosen to use that knowledge for their own purposes. Ana Delgado leaned forward. What do you mean? I mean, Ms. Delgado, that your employer's confession was not misdirected by accident. Someone wanted it to reach me, someone who knew that a confession delivered to a private detective would create far more complications than one delivered to its intended recipient. Someone who wants Mr. Dubois exposed, but in a way that maximizes damage and minimizes their own involvement. Muriel Brigham's expression had grown increasingly grim. Mr. Wolfe, if this confession is genuine, it represents a serious breach of competition integrity. The Montclair competition's reputation depends on absolute fairness. If word of this spreads, it will spread, Wolfe said with certainty. That is precisely what someone intends. The question is whether we can identify that someone before they achieve their goal. He turned his attention back to Dubois. You will provide Archie with a complete list of everyone who had access to information about the competition. Judges, staff, contestants, sponsors, everyone. You will also provide detailed information about your interactions with each of these individuals, particularly any who might have harbored resentment about your victory. And then, Dubois asked, then we discover who has been playing puppet master with your guilt, Mr. Dubois, and we ensure that their performance ends before it destroys more than your reputation. As our visitors prepared to leave, I couldn't help but notice that the brownstone's usual tranquility had been thoroughly shattered. The office, normally a sanctuary of ordered thought, now hummed with the tension of secrets exposed and machinations revealed. Someone had invaded our peace with calculated precision, using Antoine Dubois' guilt as a weapon and his confession as ammunition. But if they thought they could manipulate Nero Wolfe as easily as they'd manipulated a guilt-ridden pâtissier, they were about to discover the difference between a man who bakes under pressure and one who thrives on it. The game, as they say, was afoot. And in our house, the game was always played by Wolfe's rules. By Thursday evening, the list Antoine Dubois had provided read like the guest roster for a dinner party in hell, each name representing someone with sufficient motive, opportunity, and culinary ambition to make Lucrezia Borgia look like a Sunday school teacher organizing a bake sale. I spread the papers across my desk while Wolfe finished his after-dinner beer, savoring both Fritz's spectacular beef bourguignon and the intellectual puzzle that had landed in our laps like a perfectly timed soufflé. 5 primary suspects, I announced, arranging the information in neat stacks, each orbiting the Montclair competition like planets around a very expensive sun, and each with enough reason to want our confessing pâtissier served up on a silver platter. Wolfe set down his beer glass and gave me his attention. At 9 o'clock in the evening, no small gift. Proceed. First, the obvious candidate, Giselle Leclerc herself, age 42, originally from Lyon, built Le Petit Four into one of Manhattan's most respected patisseries before Dubois' rumor campaign destroyed her reputation and her business. Currently reduced to teaching private baking classes from a studio apartment in Queens. a considerable fall from her previous penthouse on the Upper East Side. Her motive requires no elaboration, Wolfe observed. Revenge, pure and simple. She lost everything because of Dubois' lie. If anyone has reason to want him exposed and humiliated publicly rather than privately, it's her. I moved to the next file. Marcus Hoffman, the third finalist. 48 years old, third-generation baker running Hoffman's Bakehouse in Brooklyn. A solid, traditional operation that's been struggling to compete with the trendy Manhattan establishments. He placed second in the competition, which was apparently the closest he'd ever come to major success. His reaction to losing? According to Dubois, bitter doesn't begin to cover it. Hoffman made several public comments about politics in the judging process and has been vocal about the competition's lack of transparency. A man who plays by the rules, discovering that the winner cheated would be motivating. Wolfe's fingers drummed once against his desk. Continue. Margaret Chen, Muriel Brigham's assistant and the competition's coordinator. 29 years old, MBA from Columbia, handles all logistics, communications, and administrative details. She knows every judge's preference, every contestant's weakness, and every whisper in the hallways. Her interest in exposing Mr. Dubois? Professional advancement, possibly. If the competition's integrity is questioned, Brigham's position becomes vulnerable. Chen is perfectly positioned to step into her shoes, or it could be simpler, loyalty to the competition's reputation, a desire to see justice done. I consulted my notes. Then we have Philippe Moreau, head judge for the past 5 years, 61 years old, chef-owner of 3 Michelin-starred restaurants, reputation built on absolute standards and uncompromising perfectionism. His connection to our case? Dubois mentioned that Moreau seemed particularly harsh in his criticism of Giselle's work during the final judging. More than professional critique, almost personal. If Moreau discovered he'd been manipulated into destroying an innocent competitor's career, his ego alone would demand retribution. And the fifth? Dr. Victoria Ashworth, food critic for Culinary Arts Quarterly and the competition's media liaison. 55 years old, PhD in food science from Cornell. Built her career on exposing fraud and maintaining industry standards. According to Dubois, she approached him after his victory with pointed questions about his techniques. She was suspicious even then. Wolfe leaned back, his expression thoughtful. 5 suspects, each with access to information about the competition's inner workings, each with reason to want Mr. Dubois exposed. But consider, Archie, why was his confession redirected to us rather than delivered to its intended recipient? Because someone wanted to start a fire, but didn't want to be caught holding the matches. Precisely. A private confession to Ms. Leclerc would have resulted in personal confrontation, perhaps private vengeance. But by redirecting it here, our puppet master ensures public exposure, official investigation, and maximum damage not just to Mr. Dubois, but to the entire competition structure. So we're not just looking for someone who wants revenge on Dubois. We're looking for someone who wants to shake up the whole system. Indeed, someone who understands that involving us transforms a private matter into a public reckoning. Friday morning found me standing outside a converted warehouse in Long Island City, where Giselle Leclerc had established what she optimistically called a consulting kitchen. The space was a far cry from her former elegant patisserie. Industrial lighting, concrete floors, and utilitarian equipment that prioritized function over form. Giselle herself moved through the workspace with the fluid precision of a dancer, her graying hair pinned in a simple chignon, her chef's whites immaculate despite their obvious age. Everything about her suggested competence held under tight control, dignity maintained despite reduced circumstances. "Mr. Goodwin," she said in accented English that made my name sound like a compliment, "you mentioned on the telephone that someone has stolen something meant for me." "A confession, Ms. Leclerc, written in caramel by Antoine Dubois." It was meant to be delivered to you yesterday morning, but someone intercepted it and redirected it to my employer instead. Her reaction was immediate and unmistakably genuine. A sharp intake of breath followed by a look of such profound sadness that I felt like an intruder in a private moment of grief. Antoine confessed, after all this time, you knew about his sabotage. She turned away, busying herself with arranging tools that were already perfectly arranged. I suspected. The timing was too convenient, the rumors too specific. But suspecting and knowing are different things, non? And what good would accusations do without proof? It would have cleared your reputation. Perhaps it would have made me appear bitter, desperate. A woman crying conspiracy when her work simply was not good enough. She faced me again, and I saw steel beneath the sadness. I chose to let my work speak for itself. It has been a slow conversation, but an honest one. Ms. Leclerc, have you had any recent contact with Mr. Dubois? Any attempt to encourage this confession? No, monsieur. I have not spoken to Antoine Dubois since the day of the competition. I have not seen him, written to him, or asked anyone else to contact him on my behalf. Then who do you think intercepted his confession? Her smile was bitter as burned sugar. Someone who wishes to see Antoine punished more thoroughly than a private apology would allow. Someone who understands that public shame is a more lasting source than private remorse. Any candidates? In the culinary world, Mr. Goodwin, grudges are aged like fine wine. They improve with time and become more potent. Antoine's victory made many enemies. The question is, which of them has finally decided to uncork their revenge? As I left Giselle's makeshift kitchen, I found myself believing her innocence. But belief and certainty were different things, as she'd pointed out. Someone had orchestrated this elaborate exposure of Antoine Dubois, someone with access to his confession and the knowledge to redirect it effectively. The question was whether that someone was among the remaining 4 suspects on my list, or whether we were dealing with a puppet master who preferred to remain completely in the shadows. Either way, I had more interviews ahead of me, and the distinct feeling that each conversation would add another layer to what was becoming a very complicated recipe for revenge. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in his office, contemplating the caramel confession with the intensity he usually reserved for rare orchids. Well, he asked, without looking up. If Giselle Leclerc is our puppet master, she deserves an Academy Award. Either she's innocent, or she's the most accomplished actress this side of Broadway. Noted. Tomorrow you will interview Mr. Hoffman, if our orchestrator seeks to destroy the competition's credibility entirely. A bitter second-place finisher would be an ideal ally, or an ideal scapegoat. The game was definitely afoot, and in our house, that meant it would be played by Wolfe's rules until someone made a mistake large enough for him to pounce on. The circle of suspects was drawn, their motives established, and the first interview complete. Now came the delicate work of determining which of them had decided that Antoine Dubois' guilt was too valuable a weapon to waste on a private apology. Saturday morning found me standing outside Hoffman's bakehouse in Brooklyn, where the honest aroma of yeast and flour competed successfully with the less honest smell of urban exhaust. The building squatted on its corner like a prize fighter who decided that bread was more profitable than bruises. Solid, weathered, and unashamed of the work that had shaped it. Marcus Hoffman was behind the counter, forearms dusted with flour up to the elbows like permanent epaulettes. He had the build of a man who'd spent 30 years wrestling with dough and winning, and eyes that held the particular frustration of someone who'd watched inferior work receive superior recognition. "You're Goodwin," he said without preamble, sliding a plate across the counter. The Bismarck on it looked like it had been assembled by angels with a sense of proportion. "Margaret Chen called yesterday, said someone was finally asking the right questions about that competition." The right questions being, how a showboat with fancy techniques beat bakers who've been perfecting their craft since before he learned to crack an egg. Hoffman wiped his hands on a towel that had seen honest service. I knew something stank about Dubois' victory. My bread was perfect that day, better than perfect. And Giselle Leclerc, that woman could make angels weep with her pastry work. For her to place third while he took first, it was like watching a street magician win a symphony competition. Did you suspect sabotage at the time? Suspected? Hell, I felt it. In my bones. But suspecting and proving are different animals. And I'm just a Brooklyn baker. Who's going to listen to me cry conspiracy when the golden boy from Manhattan takes the prize? You never tried to investigate. Hoffman's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. With what? I've got a business to run, bills to pay, employees who depend on me. I don't have time for detective work. But if someone's finally exposing that fraud for what he is, I'll buy them dinner. Where were you Thursday morning when the confession was intercepted? Right here, same as every morning for 20 years. Started the ovens at 4, had the first batch ready by 6. Ask anyone in the neighborhood. Marcus Hoffman doesn't miss work, not for sickness, not for revenge, not for anything. I believed him, which didn't necessarily clear him, but did suggest that if he was our puppet master, he was either innocent or deserved an Academy Award. As I prepared to leave, he called after me. Goodwin, when you catch whoever's pulling these strings, ask them something for me. Ask them if destroying Dubois will bring back Giselle's restaurant or give me my shot at that prize money. Because all I see is more good people getting hurt while the real problems stay the same. My next stop was the gleaming offices of the Montclair competition, where Margaret Chen presided over a domain of polished efficiency. She was taller than I'd expected, crisp in a navy dress, with hair clipped back so precisely you could have used it to measure angles. Mr. Goodwin, she said, standing as I entered. Miss Brigham mentioned you'd be calling. How can I assist with your inquiry? We're investigating irregularities in last year's competition, Ms. Chen. Specifically, the circumstances surrounding Antoine Dubois' victory. Her expression remained professionally neutral. The competition takes its integrity very seriously. Any suggestion of impropriety is deeply concerning. Were you aware of the rumors about Giselle Leclerc's kitchen inspection? I was. We conducted an internal review immediately. The rumors were completely baseless. Ms. Leclerc's standards were impeccable. The damage to her reputation was unfortunate and undeserved. Do you have any idea who might have started those rumors? No. They seemed to emerge from nowhere and spread through the judging panel like spilled wine through white linen. By the time we could address them, the damage was done. I let my eyes wander her office, noting the meticulous organization, the awards and certificates that spoke of professional competence. On her credenza, I spotted a courier envelope with a bright blue logo and a tracking number stub peeking from beneath a stack of papers. Ms. Chen, you have access to all competition records, judging notes, internal communications. In your professional opinion, was there anything irregular about the judging process? She met my gaze directly. I'm bound by confidentiality agreements, Mr. Goodwin. However, I can assure you that if I possessed evidence of malfeasance, I would bring it to Miss Brigham's attention immediately. Your loyalty is to the competition's integrity, to the idea of what it should be, she said carefully, which is not always identical to what it is. Philippe Moreau received me in his flagship restaurant's private dining room, a space that made you wish you'd worn a better tie to call your mother. He sat like a culinary magistrate, his chef's whites pristine as fresh snow, his silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the lunch service happening below. Mr. Goodwin, he said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 Michelin stars. I confess myself intrigued. Nero Wolfe takes interest in a pastry competition? Most unusual. He's interested in justice, Monsieur Moreau, and in a caramel confession that found its way to his door. Moreau's eyebrows rose fractionally. Ah, Dubois. I suspected that young man had termites in his timber. His technique was adequate, his presentation competent, but his work lacked soul, the indefinable quality that separates craft from art. Yet you awarded him first place. He sighed, a sound that carried the weight of professional disappointment. The judges are human, monsieur. We are influenced by atmosphere, by whispers. The rumors about Mademoiselle Leclerc created a cloud of doubt. One attempts objectivity, but the mind plays tricks when doubt is planted. You feel you were manipulated? If these allegations prove true, then yes. Manipulated, deceived, made to appear foolish. His hand clenched on the white tablecloth. To know that I, Philippe Moreau, was duped into awarding first prize to a charlatan, it is an insult to my judgment, to my very profession. Angry enough to want revenge? His smile was thin as parchment. I prefer the word justice, Mr. Goodwin, but yes, Dubois has finally confessed. He deserves to be stripped of every accolade he gained through deception. As I prepared to leave, Moreau stopped me with a slight gesture. Tell your employer this. If he examined the piping on that caramel confession, he will have noted that the pressure variations suggest a hand narrower than Dubois'. The technique is correct, but the physical characteristics are wrong. A woman's hand, perhaps, or a man who has never piped professional quantities. You're suggesting Dubois didn't write his own confession. I'm suggesting the hand that wrote it was not trained in volume production. Make of that what you will. My final interview was with Dr. Victoria Ashworth at the offices of Culinary Arts Quarterly. She was exactly as advertised. Sharp-eyed, academic, with the clinical precision of someone who'd built her career on exposing fraud and maintaining standards. Mr. Goodwin, she said, offering a brisk handshake, I've been expecting someone to investigate that competition for months. Dubois' victory never sat right with me. You suspected irregularities from the beginning. His work was technically proficient, but lacked the innovative spark that should have won such a prestigious competition. And the timing of those rumors about Leclerc was suspiciously convenient. Did you investigate on your own? I tried. I visited Leclerc's kitchen personally. It was immaculate. I attempted to trace the source of the rumors, but they seemed to have emerged from thin air. Without access to internal judging notes, solid proof was elusive. Did you share your suspicions with anyone? I spoke with Marcus Hoffman. He was equally frustrated. I also mentioned my concerns to Margaret Chen, though she seemed more interested in protecting the competition's image than uncovering truth. And the anonymous call to Muriel Brigham yesterday, suggesting she contact us about Dubois' confession? Dr. Ashworth's smile was razor thin. Someone who understands leverage and prefers to work behind the scenes. Someone who believes in intellectual honesty above personal comfort. She paused meaningfully. That description could fit several people, couldn't it? Returning to the brownstone as evening shadows lengthened, I found Wolfe in his office, methodically cleaning his glasses, always a sign of deep contemplation. I provided a detailed report of my interviews, laying out each suspect's character, motive, and potential for orchestrating our elaborate delivery. 4 distinct personalities, I concluded, each with sufficient reason to want Dubois exposed. Hoffman's working-class resentment, Chen's professional ambition, Moreau's wounded pride, Ashworth's intellectual integrity. Any of them could have decided that private confession was insufficient punishment for public fraud. Wolfe replaced his glasses, his dark eyes glinting. And the forensic observation from Monsieur Moreau, that the confession wasn't piped by Dubois' hand, which could point to Ana Delgado or to someone else entirely who wanted us to think it pointed to her. Indeed, the question remains whether we're dealing with a single puppet master or multiple parties with convergent interests. Wolfe leaned back, his chair creaking under his bulk. Tomorrow, Archie, we shall discover whether our mysterious correspondent is content to observe from the shadows or feels compelled to take a more active role in their drama. I had the distinct feeling that whoever was pulling these strings was about to discover the difference between manipulating guilt-ridden pastry chefs and matching wits with Nero Wolfe. In our house, games were played by Wolfe's rules, and those rules had never favored the puppet masters who preferred to work in darkness. Sunday morning brought the kind of crisp air that makes even Manhattan seem civilized, along with Fritz's discovery that someone had been playing uninvited games in his sacred kitchen. I found him standing before his spice cabinet with the expression of a priest who discovered vandals rearranging his altar. "Archie," he said, his usually cheerful voice tight with distress. "Someone has been here." The spice cabinet looked normal to my untrained eye. Dozens of small jars arranged with Fritz's customary precision, each labeled in his careful script. But Fritz knew his domain the way Wolfe knew his orchids, and if he said something was wrong, something was wrong. "What's missing, Fritz?" "Nothing is missing. That is what troubles me." He pointed to a jar of saffron, worth more per ounce than decent whiskey. "This was moved. See how the label face is left? I always position labels exactly forward. And this," he indicated the vanilla extract. "Someone opened it. The cap sits differently." "When did you last check everything?" "Yesterday evening, when I prepared herbs for this morning's eggs Benedict. Everything was perfect then." I examined the kitchen's rear door. Solid, undamaged, securely locked. The windows were similarly intact. Whoever had entered possessed either extraordinary skill or a key that shouldn't have existed. "Fritz, there's something else." I pointed to the magnetic knife strip where his tools hung in perfect order. "Your small offset spatula, the one with the walnut handle. It's missing." His face went pale. "Mon Dieu. I used it for the custards last night, cleaned it, placed it there myself. It does not simply disappear." I called Wolfe, who descended from his morning orchid session with the measured tread of a man who'd been expecting trouble. He examined the kitchen with the intensity of a jeweler appraising diamonds, his dark eyes cataloging details that escaped my notice. "Extraordinary," he murmured. "Fritz, show me exactly how the saffron jar was positioned." Fritz demonstrated, his movements precise despite his distress. Wolfe nodded slowly, then moved to examine the knife strip. "The spatula was taken for a specific purpose," he announced. "Not theft, utility. Someone required a thin, flexible blade for delicate work." "What kind of work?" "The kind that involves sampling without obvious damage." His expression grew grim. "Archie, examine the confession box." I retrieved the Dubois patisserie box from Wolfe's safe, opening it carefully. The caramel sheet lay as we'd left it, amber and smooth, but Wolfe's trained eye caught what mine had missed. "Here," he said, pointing to the lower right corner. Through his magnifying glass, I could see it. The thinnest possible shaving, a crescent no wider than a hair, missing from the edge. The cut was clean, professional, done with something thin and angled. "Your missing spatula," I said. "Or one identical to it. Whoever came last night wanted a sample for analysis. To verify ingredients, perhaps, or to prove the confession's authenticity." But there was more. As we examined the office, I caught a faint scent lingering near the doorway. Burnt caramel, not the clean crackle of Fritz's custards, but the acrid smell of sugar held too long over heat. And on the Persian rug, 2 feet inside the threshold, lay a single white pearl, a dragée, the kind used to decorate petits fours. "Fritz doesn't use dragées," I observed. "No. But someone who works with them regularly might carry them inadvertently." Wolfe's voice was dangerously quiet. "This was not random vandalism, Archie. This was precise reconnaissance." I checked my desk drawer, locked as always, but something felt wrong. My interview notes were there, the Dubois file intact, but the courier tracking slip had been moved. Not stolen, but repositioned, examined, and replaced, with subtle differences that only careful observation would detect. "They wanted information," I said, "about the delivery, about our investigation. They wanted to know how much we knew and how we learned it." Wolfe's fingers drummed once against his desk, a rare display of agitation. Someone has violated the sanctity of this house to conduct surveillance on our methods. This transforms our case from professional inquiry to personal affront. Inside job. The locks weren't forced. Either exceptional skill or unauthorized access. Given the precision of the intrusion, I suspect the latter. He stood, a gesture that in Wolfe's universe constituted dramatic emphasis. Someone who has been in this house before, someone who knows our routines, our security measures, our habits. The implications were chilling. Our brownstone, usually an impregnable fortress of ordered thought, had been penetrated by someone who understood its defenses intimately enough to circumvent them. "What's the play?" I asked. "We respond to provocation with precision. Tomorrow you will contact Saul Panzer. If our anonymous correspondent wishes to escalate this game, we shall accommodate them, but by our rules, not theirs. And tonight? Tonight, we make certain adjustments to our security arrangements. Whoever entered here once may attempt to do so again. When they do, we shall be prepared to offer them a reception they will find educational." As Sunday evening settled over the brownstone, I found myself looking at familiar spaces with new eyes. The office, where I'd worked for years, the kitchen where Fritz created his daily miracles, the hallways I'd walked thousands of times, all now felt subtly different, contaminated by the knowledge that hostile eyes had examined them in darkness. But if our mysterious opponent thought they could intimidate Nero Wolfe by violating his sanctuary, they were about to discover their fundamental error in judgment. In our house, games were played to conclusion, and Wolfe had never met a puzzle he couldn't solve or an adversary he couldn't outmaneuver. The confession written in caramel had brought us a case. The subtle trespass had made it personal, and in Nero Wolfe's world, personal affronts were settled with the kind of methodical precision that left no room for doubt about the final outcome. The puppet master was about to learn that some stages were too dangerous for amateur theatrics. Monday. Morning arrived with a kind of oppressive humidity that makes even the most civilized spaces feel like conspiracies waiting to unfold. The brownstone, usually a fortress of ordered tranquility, hummed with a new tension following Sunday night's violation. Fritz moved through his restored kitchen with the careful precision of a man who'd learned that sanctuary could be breached, while I found myself checking locks and windows with the thoroughness of someone who discovered that our walls were less impermeable than we'd believed. The first sign that our anonymous puppet master had escalated their game arrived not through forced entry or subtle manipulation, but through the morning edition of the New York Gazette. I was halfway through my second cup of Fritz's exceptional coffee when the headline on page 3 struck me like a physical blow. Caramel confession rocks elite pastry world. Montclair competition embroiled in fraud scandal. The article, authored by Brenda Sterling, a reporter whose investigative methods were as sharp as her elbows and twice as unforgiving, laid out the contents of Antoine Dubois' confession with surgical precision. Every detail was there. The false rumors about Giselle Leclerc's kitchen, the manipulation of the judges, the destruction of an innocent woman's career and a livelihood. The piece quoted sources close to the investigation, who confirmed that the confession had been delivered to a prominent Manhattan private detective, managing to implicate Wolfe without naming him directly. What the article didn't mention was equally telling. No reference to the confession's redirection, no hint that it had been intercepted and weaponized, no suggestion that we were dealing with anything more complex than a guilt-ridden baker's belated attack of conscience. The omissions were as carefully crafted as the inclusions, designed to maximize scandal while minimizing any trail back to the true orchestrator. I carried the paper into the office, where Wolfe sat behind his desk like a monument to contemplative fury. He'd obviously seen the article. The red pencil marks circling key phrases told that story clearly enough. Our puppet master has decided that subtlety is insufficient, I observed, dropping the paper onto his desk. Indeed. and with remarkable precision. His voice carried the controlled anger of a man who'd been maneuvered into a public arena against his will. Note the timing, Archie. 36 hours after the trespass, 18 hours after they confirmed the confession's presence in this house, the story breaks. Someone has been orchestrating this revelation with the patience of a chess master. The telephone's ring interrupted his analysis. I answered to find Muriel Brigham's voice tight with barely controlled hysteria. "Mr. Goodwin, this is a disaster. Have you seen the Gazette? The board is in complete upheaval. Sponsors are demanding explanations, and the press is circling like sharks. This is precisely what I feared would happen." "It appears someone wanted it to happen, Ms. Brigham. Public exposure was always their goal." "But why?" "We were managing the situation internally, quietly. Now it's a media circus." Her voice rose to a pitch that suggested she was one headline away from complete breakdown. "My career is finished. 20 years of building the competition's reputation, destroyed by one article." "Perhaps that was the intention," I suggested. "Some people prefer public justice to private resolution." Before she could launch into another tirade, I ended the call only to have the phone ring again immediately. This time, it was Antoine Dubois, his voice thick with despair and what sounded like tears. "Mr. Goodwin, I've seen the newspaper. Everyone knows. My customers, my suppliers, my competitors, they all know what I did. I am ruined." "You confessed, Mr. Dubois. Someone simply ensured that confession reached a wider audience than you intended. But I trusted you. I trusted Mr. Wolfe. This was supposed to be private, a way to make amends quietly. Now I'm a public villain." "Someone felt that private amends were insufficient for public wrongs," I told him. "The question is who appointed themselves your judge and jury." His sobs were audible through the receiver, the sound of a man watching his world collapse in real time. "What happens now? Will I be arrested? Will they take everything I have left?" "That depends on what Mr. Wolfe discovers and how cooperative you choose to be with that discovery." I hung up and turned to find Wolfe studying the newspaper article with the intensity he usually reserved for rare orchid specimens. He'd circled several phrases in red. "Sources close to the investigation, mysteriously diverted, and prominent Manhattan detective." Observe the language, Archie. Our orchestrator wishes to appear as a mere facilitator of truth rather than an active manipulator of events. They've positioned themselves as someone who simply ensured that justice was served, not as someone who violated our privacy and weaponized stolen information. "Professional spin control," I agreed, "which suggests someone familiar with managing public narratives, or someone who understands that the best way to destroy reputations is through carefully managed revelation." He set down the paper and fixed me with a look that meant business was about to commence in earnest. "This escalation requires a proportional response, Archie. The subtle approach has been countered by overt action. We must now employ more direct methods of inquiry." He reached for the telephone with the deliberate movement of a man who decided that the gloves were coming off. "Get me Saul Panza." Within minutes, Saul's calm, gravelly voice filled the office through the speaker. If Saul was surprised to hear from Wolfe on a Monday morning, his tone gave no indication. "What's the situation?" Wolfe provided a concise but comprehensive summary of our case. The caramel confession, its mysterious redirection, the subtle trespass, and now the public leak. He omitted no detail that might prove relevant, painting a picture of systematic manipulation by someone with considerable resources and patience. "Someone has been playing an elaborate game, Saul," Wolfe concluded. "They've demonstrated planning, discretion, and a willingness to violate private domains to achieve their ends. They're intelligent, well-connected, and have access to both information and media contacts. What do you need?" "I need the source of this newspaper leak identified. Begin with Brenda Sterling at the Gazette. Discover who provided her with this information and how they obtained it. I also need surveillance on our 5 primary suspects, discreet but thorough. Someone in that group is our puppet master, and they've just made their first significant mistake by going public. Consider it done. Anything else? Yes. Be careful, Saul. Whoever we're dealing with has already demonstrated a capacity for sophisticated planning and a willingness to escalate when pressed. They may not react well to direct investigation. Understood? I'll be in touch. As the line went dead, I found myself looking at Wolfe with new appreciation. The decision to bring in Saul Panzer was an admission that our case had moved beyond the comfortable confines of intellectual exercise. It was now a matter of active investigation in a hostile environment, and Saul was the best there was at navigating such waters. "He'll find them," I said, knowing it to be true. "He will," Wolfe agreed, leaning back in his chair with the satisfaction of a general who just deployed his most effective weapon. "And when he does, we'll discover whether our anonymous correspondent is as clever at avoiding detection as they are at orchestrating revelation." The morning's events had transformed our case from a private matter of professional ethics into a public scandal with far-reaching implications. The puppet master had successfully escalated the pressure on all fronts, destroying Dubois' reputation, threatening Brigham's career, and forcing Wolfe into a public investigation he'd have preferred to conduct privately. But if they thought they could manipulate Nero Wolfe as easily as they'd manipulated a guilt-ridden pâtissier and a sensation-hungry reporter, they were about to discover their fundamental error in judgment. The increased pressure had revealed their hand, and in Wolfe's world, revealed hands were vulnerable hands. The confession written in caramel had brought us a case. The subtle trespass had made it personal. The public leak had made it war. And wars, in Nero Wolfe's experience, were won by those who understood that the most effective pressure was applied with surgical precision rather than theatrical flourish. Tuesday morning arrived with the precision of a well-orchestrated symphony, each note timed to create maximum discord in the carefully constructed world of New York's culinary elite. The New York Gazette lay on Wolfe's desk like evidence in a trial, its headlines screaming the story our anonymous puppet master had so carefully orchestrated. But if they expected Wolfe to retreat into wounded silence, they had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the man they were attempting to manipulate. Saul Panzer's report came at precisely 10 o'clock, delivered with a methodical precision that made him invaluable for work requiring both discretion and thoroughness. "The leak came through Margaret Chen," he announced without preamble, settling into the red leather chair with familiar ease. She contacted Brenda Sterling Sunday evening, provided comprehensive details about the confession, and positioned herself as a concerned administrator acting in the interests of competition integrity. Sterling corroborated what she could through public records and Brigham's inadvertent confirmation. Wolfe's fingers drummed once against his desk. Miss Chen positioned herself as a whistleblower rather than a conspirator. Exactly. But there's more complexity here than simple whistleblowing. Saul consulted his notebook with professional precision. I traced the dragée we found on your rug. Gioiette brand, number 4 silver pearls, limited import distribution. Only 4 establishments in Manhattan use them regularly. 2 high-end patisseries, the Montclair Competition's demonstration kitchen, and Giselle Leclerc's teaching studio. Dubois doesn't use them. Switched to a cheaper brand 6 months ago. Cost-cutting measure. Saul's expression suggested he'd found this detail particularly significant. But Ana Delgado worked at Le Petit Four for 3 years before it closed. She was Giselle Leclerc's sous-chef and protégée. The silence that followed was the kind that makes furniture seem to lean away from the center of the room. I felt the pieces of our puzzle shifting, rearranging themselves into a pattern that was both elegant and ruthless. "She's been working for the man who destroyed her mentor's career," I said slowly. "More than that," Saul continued. "I found evidence that she's been systematically documenting Dubois' operations for months. Copying files, recording conversations, building a comprehensive case from the inside. The confession wasn't just guilt. It was the final piece of evidence she needed to complete her revenge. Wolfe leaned back, his expression taking on the predatory gleam he reserved for moments when intellectual puzzles revealed their underlying architecture. She orchestrated the confession's redirection to us, knowing it would transform a private apology into a public reckoning. Then she coordinated with Chen's ambitions and Moreau's wounded pride to ensure maximum destruction of her target. A patient woman with a talent for long-term planning, I observed, and a deep understanding of human psychology. She didn't need to manipulate her allies. She simply provided the catalyst and let their own motivations drive the process. Wolfe stood, a gesture that in his universe constituted preparation for battle. But if Ms. Delgado believes she can orchestrate events in my house without consequence, she has made a fundamental error in judgment. What's our move? We respond to public theater with private precision. Wolfe moved to his desk with deliberate purpose. Archie, you will compose a letter to the editor of the Gazette. We shall acknowledge their reporting while subtly redirecting the narrative toward more relevant questions. The letter Wolfe dictated was a masterpiece of controlled indignation wrapped in polite inquiry. It confirmed that the confession had indeed been delivered to the brownstone, but emphasized that it had been mysteriously diverted from its intended recipient through unauthorized means. It connected the media leak to the surreptitious entry into our premises, transforming a general scandal into a specific violation of privacy and property. Most importantly, it shifted the public focus from Dubois' guilt to the orchestration of its public dissemination via questionable methods. Send it immediately, Wolfe instructed, reviewing the final draft. And ensure hand delivery with signed receipt. I want no question about when it was submitted. While I arranged the letter's delivery, Wolfe turned his attention to more direct action. You will also compose formal invitations to each of our suspects, as well as to Mr. Dubois and Ms. Brigham. Thursday evening, 8 o'clock, this office. The purpose, to discuss recent events and achieve a comprehensive understanding of the circumstances surrounding the confession. A gathering of all the players, a convergence of interests, each believing they understand the game being played. His smile was barely visible but unmistakably satisfied. Ms. Delgado has demonstrated considerable skill in manipulating others from the shadows. Let us see how she performs when required to defend her orchestration in the light. The invitations were formal, carrying Wolfe's unmistakable authority. Your presence is essential for the pursuit of justice. The phrase was carefully chosen. Not a request, but an obligation that would be difficult to refuse without appearing to have something to hide. The responses came throughout the day, each revealing character through acceptance or hesitation. Dubois agreed immediately, perhaps hoping for redemption. Brigham accepted reluctantly, feeling compelled by the escalating scandal. Giselle Leclerc's response was prompt and dignified. Marcus Hoffman grumbled but agreed, clearly intrigued by the prospect of confrontation. Philippe Moreau's acceptance came through his assistant, with a note that the chef considered this a matter of professional honor. Margaret Chen's response came last, her voice tight with calculation when she called. Mr. Goodwin, I find Mr. Wolfe's invitation highly unusual. Mr. Wolfe finds the entire situation highly unusual, Miss Chen. He believes direct conversation among all parties is the most efficient path to clarity. The long pause that followed suggested she was weighing risks and benefits with professional precision. Very well, I will attend. And Ms. Delgado, I asked when Chen had hung up, will attend because she cannot resist the opportunity to observe the culmination of her careful work. Wolfe's expression was grimly satisfied. She has spent months orchestrating this revenge. She will not miss its final act, even if that act takes place on a stage she does not control. As evening settled over the brownstone, I found myself appreciating the elegant complexity of Ana Delgado's revenge. She had transformed her employer's guilt into a weapon, coordinated multiple allies without their knowledge of her true role, and achieved the complete destruction of the man who had ruined her mentor's career. It was a masterpiece of patient manipulation, executed with surgical precision. But if she thought she could manipulate Nero Wolfe as easily as she had manipulated Chen's ambition and Moreau's pride, she was about to discover the difference between orchestrating guilt-ridden confessions and matching wits with a man who had built his reputation on exposing the truth behind elaborate deceptions. The confession, written in caramel, had brought us a case. The subtle trespass had made it personal. The public leak had made it war. Thursday evening would determine who controlled the terms of surrender, and in Nero Wolfe's office, those terms were always dictated by the pursuit of truth, however inconvenient that truth might prove to be for those who preferred to operate in shadows. The net was drawn, the players summoned, and the stage set for a confrontation that would reveal whether justice could be achieved through manipulation or whether it required the kind of direct intellectual honesty that Nero Wolfe had spent his career defending. Thursday evening pressed a thunderstorm against Manhattan's windows, the rain a relentless percussion outside, while inside the brownstone, the air was thick with a tension that would have curdled cream. Wolfe's office, never exactly a party venue, had been transformed into a crucible for secrets and reckonings. The chairs had been arranged with geometric precision, each one waiting for a player in this final act. The procession began in earnest at 8 o'clock sharp. Antoine Dubois arrived first, his suit rumpled and his face drawn, eyes darting nervously to every corner as if the walls might judge him. At his side, Ana Delgado was the picture of composure, her dark hair severe, her bearing professional, her eyes missing nothing. Muriel Brigham entered next, the storm at her back, her silver hair mussed and her posture stiff, the usual self-assurance sapped by scandal. Marcus Hoffman followed, his suit too new and his hands restless, the blue-collar honesty of his manner at odds with the opulence. Around him, Philippe Moreau swept in with the air of someone who considered even storms a matter of inconsequence, while Giselle Leclerc's quiet dignity seemed to fill the space between words. Margaret Chen, last to arrive, was composed, clipboard in hand, her expression a careful mask. Wolfe waited behind his desk, a general surveying a battlefield where the weapons were words and the victory would be measured in truth. Fritz hovered at the periphery, silent and watchful. Wolfe let the silence build until every eye was on him. Then his voice, calm and resonant, began. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending. We are here because a confession, written in caramel, has disrupted not only the Montclair competition, but the reputations and livelihoods of all present. Tonight I intend to clarify not merely who did what, but why it unfolded as it did." He turned first to Dubois. "Mr. Dubois, you have admitted to sabotaging Ms. Leclerc's reputation, derailing her career through a whisper campaign of lies. Your confession, intended as a private apology, arrived here instead and was subsequently leaked to the press. Explain your intentions." Dubois' voice was a cracked whisper. I wanted to confess to Giselle. I wrote the truth in caramel to match the sweetness of her work and the bitterness of what I'd done. I asked Ana to arrange its delivery. Wolfe nodded, then addressed Ana Delgado. "Miss Delgado, you were entrusted with the confession, yet it was delivered here, not to Ms. Leclerc. You claim to have used a courier, but the address was changed. Why?" Delgado's composure did not waver. "I used a courier for discretion. I provided Giselle's address." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Yet the box arrived here, addressed to A.D., your initials as well as Dubois'. And it arrived by a courier service known for following instructions exactly. This was not a random error. Someone redirected the package. But why?" He let the question hang before turning to Margaret Chen. "Miss Chen, after the confession arrived, you contacted Brenda Sterling at the Gazette and leaked its contents, positioning yourself as a whistleblower. Why reveal it then and not before? Chen's reply was steady. I needed proof. Once the confession was in your hands, its authenticity was certain. I believed exposing the fraud was my duty to the competition's integrity. Wolfe nodded. A convenient justification, but also one that advanced your own standing. The public scandal has as much to do with ambition as it does with justice. He glanced at Brigham, Moreau, Hoffman, and Leclerc in turn, each visibly absorbing the tension and their own role in the fallout. The storm outside thundered, as if nature itself punctuated Wolfe's inquiry. Now Wolfe steepled his fingers. Let us lay out the events, step by step. Mr. Dubois crafted a confession and entrusted it to Ms. Delgado. Ms. Delgado, formerly Ms. Leclerc's protégée, had both motive and opportunity. She alone could intercept or redirect the delivery, using her knowledge of both Dubois and the courier system. The confession arrived here, my office, ensuring it would never remain private. Anna, you knew my reputation. Involvement here meant investigation, not discretion. Shortly after the confession's arrival, Ms. Chen, eager to protect her position and the competition's integrity, leaked it to the press, maximizing public exposure. Meanwhile, the brownstone was trespassed. Someone with knowledge of our routines entered, took a trace of the caramel, and left a calling card, a silver dragée, used at Leclerc's and linked to Anna's former employment. This was both surveillance and warning. All of this required intimate knowledge of the key players' motives and weaknesses. Only Anna, with her connections to Dubois and Leclerc, and her proximity to the evidence, could orchestrate such a sequence. Ms. Delgado, you orchestrated this. You redirected the confession, coordinated with Ms. Chen's ambitions, and violated my house to monitor our progress. You acted not from justice, but from vengeance for your mentor. Your final mistake was letting your zeal override your caution by trespassing here. You made it personal. For a moment, Delgado's mask held. Then her posture slumped, her voice trembling. He destroyed everything she built. He would have apologized in private, absolved himself, and left Giselle's life in ruins. I made sure the world knew the truth. Leclerc's eyes glistened, but her voice was steady. Anna, vengeance does not restore what is lost. Only the truth and the courage to face it can do that. Wolfe's gaze swept the room. Each of you played a role. Mr. Dubois in cowardice and deceit. Ms. Chen in self-preservation. Ms. Delgado in righteous fury that became ruthless manipulation. Ms. Brigham in complacency. Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Moreau in pride and resentment. And you, Ms. Leclerc, in dignity and endurance. He leaned back, the case laid bare. Justice has many flavors. Bitter, sweet, and sometimes both at once. Tonight, you have all tasted the consequences of your own ambitions. Fritz appeared in the doorway, announcing dinner. The gathering dissolved in silence, each person carrying their share of guilt or vindication. As the brownstone returned to its usual quiet, Wolfe poured himself a glass of beer and spoke, voice soft but unyielding. A man may confess his sins in caramel, Archie, but only the truth spoken or revealed can cleanse the palate of conscience. I reached for my notebook and grinned, and here I thought caramel was just for dessert, not for serving justice with a side of indigestion. The storm faded, the house grew still, and the game, at least for tonight, was over. The silence that followed Ana Delgado's admission stretched like a held breath, thick with the weight of revelation and the promise of more to come. Wolfe allowed it to build, understanding that truth delivered too quickly loses its impact, while truth delivered with precision cuts deeper than any blade. When he spoke again, his voice carried the authority of a judge who had weighed evidence and found it sufficient for final judgment. Ms. Delgado, your confession of orchestration is accurate, but incomplete. You have admitted to redirecting the caramel confession and coordinating its public exposure, but you have understated the sophistication of your methods and the patience of your planning. He opened his desk drawer and withdrew a thin folder, handling it with the reverence due to evidence that had been hard-won. Saul Panzer's investigation has been remarkably thorough. The courier service maintains detailed electronic logs of all delivery modifications. Your change order was placed 12 minutes after pickup, using credentials that traced to a prepaid phone registered under a false name. A name you established 6 months ago, shortly after beginning your employment with Mr. Dubois. Anna's composure remained intact, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested Wolfe's precision was hitting its mark. The redirection was not impulsive, Ms. Delgado. It was the culmination of months of careful preparation. You researched my methods, my reputation, my address. You understood that involving me would transform a private confession into a public investigation, ensuring maximum damage to your target. Wolfe's gaze moved to Margaret Chen, who sat rigid with her clipboard clutched like a shield. Ms. Chen, your role as the conduit for public exposure was not coincidental. Ms. Delgado studied your ambitions, your frustrations with your position, your dedication to what you called competition integrity. She provided you with the perfect opportunity to act as a whistleblower while serving her own purposes. I acted independently, Chen protested, but her voice lacked conviction. You acted predictably, Wolfe corrected. Ms. Delgado understood that your desire for advancement and your genuine concern for the competition's reputation would make you an ideal ally. She didn't need to recruit you. She simply needed to provide the catalyst and let your own motivations drive the process. He turned his attention back to Anna, his expression taking on the clinical precision of a surgeon exposing diseased tissue. Your trespass of this house on Sunday night was perhaps your most audacious act, but also your most revealing. You gained entry using a bump key. The brass particles Fritz found on the office rug confirmed this. You took a sample of the caramel confession using Fritz's offset spatula, which you discarded in the alley after cleaning it. The silver dragée you left was deliberate misdirection, meant to suggest connection to your former employment while actually confirming it. Fritz stepped forward slightly, his usually cheerful demeanor subdued by the violation of his domain. The spatula was found this morning, cleaned but bearing traces of caramel on the tang. It has been returned to its proper place. Your purpose was twofold, Wolfe continued. First, to verify the confession's authenticity through chemical analysis. You needed to confirm it contained the specific ingredients and techniques that would prove Mr. Dubois' authorship. Second, to ensure that I would not dismiss the matter as a simple case of misdirected mail, but would engage with the public scandal you intended to create. Antoine Dubois looked stricken, his earlier despair now compounded by the realization of how thoroughly he had been manipulated. Anna, why? I trusted you. I was trying to make amends. Ana Delgado's mask finally slipped, revealing the passionate conviction that had driven her elaborate revenge. Because private amends were not enough, Antoine, you destroyed Giselle's life, her career, everything she had built. A quiet apology would have absolved your conscience while leaving her reputation in ruins. The world needed to know what you did. The world needed to know the truth, Giselle Leclerc said quietly, her voice carrying the dignity that had sustained her through months of undeserved disgrace. But truth obtained through deception is no truth at all, Anna. It is merely another form of manipulation. Wolfe nodded approvingly. Ms. Leclerc understands what Ms. Delgado chose to ignore. That justice achieved through unjust methods is no justice at all. Ms. Delgado, your loyalty to your mentor was admirable, but your methods were indistinguishable from those you sought to punish. He leaned back in his chair, the gesture signaling that the revelation was complete and judgment was about to be rendered. You orchestrated an elaborate campaign of manipulation using Mr. Dubois' guilt, Miss Chen's ambition, and the legitimate grievances of others to achieve your revenge. You violated the sanctity of this house, manipulated evidence, and perverted the pursuit of justice into an exercise in calculated destruction. And what would you have done? Anna demanded, her composure finally cracking completely. Let him apologize in private and go on with his life while Giselle remained ruined. Let the competition continue rewarding fraud and punishing excellence. I would have pursued truth through honest means, Wolfe replied with finality. Truth has its own power, Ms. Delgado. It requires no embellishment, no manipulation, no violation of trust or property. Your methods achieved your goal, but they also revealed that you had learned the wrong lessons from your mentor's destruction. The office fell silent except for the sound of rain against windows and the subtle tick of the wall clock. Each person present had been revealed, their motivations exposed, their roles in the elaborate drama laid bare. The confession written in caramel had indeed brought truth, but not the simple truth of one man's guilt. Instead, it had revealed a complex web of manipulation, revenge, and justice, perverted by the very methods used to pursue it. What happens now? Muriel Brigham asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Wolfe's answer was immediate and precise. Now, the complete truth will be presented to the appropriate authorities. Mr. Dubois, you will face the consequences of your sabotage, both legal and professional. Ms. Delgado, your actions constitute criminal trespass, theft, and conspiracy. Ms. Chen, your role in disseminating stolen information will be noted. He paused, then continued with a measured tone of final judgment. The Montclair competition, Ms. Brigham, will either reform itself with genuine commitment to integrity, or it will cease to exist as a respected institution. And Ms. Leclerc, your reputation, having been unfairly tarnished, will now be unequivocally cleared. Justice, Anna said quietly, was all I wanted. Justice, Wolfe corrected, is what you will now receive, not the selective justice you attempted to impose, but the complete justice that examines all actions and finds all parties accountable for their choices. As our visitors prepared to leave, each carrying their share of guilt or vindication, I found myself reflecting on the elegant complexity of Ana Delgado's revenge. She had demonstrated remarkable patience, intelligence, and dedication. Her mistake had been believing that noble ends could justify ignoble means, and that truth could be served through deception. The confession written in caramel had brought us a case that revealed the difference between justice and revenge, between truth and manipulation, between the pursuit of right and the satisfaction of personal grievance. In Nero Wolfe's world, those distinctions mattered more than the sweetest revenge or the most elegant deception. The game was over, the truth revealed, and the brownstone could return to its proper function as a sanctuary for honest thought and Fritz's exceptional cooking. Some lessons, I reflected, were best learned the hard way, and some confessions were better written in ink than sugar. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that follows thunderstorms, as if the city had been scrubbed clean of deception along with the dust. The brownstone felt lighter somehow, the oppressive weight of secrets lifted from its walls like smoke finally finding an open window. Fritz hummed again in his kitchen, always the surest sign that order had been restored to our universe. I found Wolfe in his office at 11 o'clock sharp, having completed his morning ritual with the orchids. He sat behind his desk with the satisfied air of a chess master whose opponent had finally acknowledged checkmate, the caramel confession before him no longer evidence but merely an artifact of misguided ambition. The doorbell's announcement at 11:15 brought Inspector Kramer, jaw first as usual, with Pearlie Stebbins for moral support and a folded copy of the Gazette for ammunition. He stood in the office, eyeing the pastry box, like he'd discovered a loaded weapon at a church social. "Wolfe," he growled, settling his bulk into the red leather chair. "If you're expanding into bakery disputes, warn me. I'm not equipped to referee flour fights." "Good morning, Inspector," Wolfe replied with the patience of a man who'd restored order to chaos. "You were summoned because crimes were committed. Criminal trespass, theft, conspiracy to manipulate evidence. You may direct your irritation about newspaper coverage elsewhere." I provided Kramer with the complete account, the redirected confession, Ana Delgado's elaborate orchestration, the trespass of our brownstone, Margaret Chen's calculated leak to the press. He absorbed it with his usual economy, only interrupting once to bark instructions at Pearlie's notebook. "Ms. Delgado will be at her Queen's address," Wolfe added when I finished. "She will not flee. She contrived to appear righteous, not fugitive." "If she's still there," Kramer said, gathering his hat, "it'll be because she wants to explain her noble motives to a judge." "I'll take noble. It books the same as everything else." "And the baker. Mr. Dubois will present himself to the district attorney with counsel. His statement will be comprehensive. He has discovered the burdens of genuine penitence." After Kramer's departure, the day filled itself with the inevitable aftermath of exposed truth. The telephone became a confessional for the various players in our drama, each seeking absolution or at least understanding. Muriel Brigham called first, her voice steady but subdued. "Mr. Goodwin, the competition board has acted swiftly. We're rescinding Mr. Dubois' prize, issuing formal apologies to Ms. Leclerc, and implementing comprehensive reforms. Chef Moreau has agreed to chair our integrity committee. And Ms. Chen, placed on administrative leave pending investigation. She will not be returning to her position." Philippe Moreau's call came an hour later, his cultured voice carrying unexpected warmth. "Mr. Goodwin, I wish to thank Mr. Wolfe for revealing the complete truth. However painful, honesty is preferable to elegant deception." He paused. "I'm organizing a small dinner party next week, a celebration of culinary integrity. I would be honored if Mr. Wolfe would attend as my guest." I covered the mouthpiece and looked at Wolfe, whose eyebrows rose fractionally. "Moreau wants to cook for you, a dinner celebrating culinary integrity. Inform Monsieur Moreau that I would be delighted to attend, provided Fritz may accompany me to observe his techniques." The most poignant call came from Antoine Dubois himself, his voice steadier than it had been in days. "Mr. Goodwin, I wanted to thank Mr. Wolfe for exposing the complete truth. Anna's methods were wrong, but her loyalty to Giselle was what I should have shown from the beginning. What will you do now?" "I'm closing the patisserie. My reputation is destroyed, and deservedly so, but I have been considering. Perhaps there are other ways to make amends. Anonymous contributions to culinary education, scholarships for young chefs who lack connections but possess talent. Penance through practical action. The only kind that matters, I think." My final visit was to Long Island City, where Giselle Leclerc received the news of her vindication with characteristic dignity. She examined the formal apology from the competition board and set it aside with a slight nod. "Good," she said simply. "There will be those who say it comes too late. They will not be wrong, but it is good." Brigham mentioned consulting opportunities, and there's talk of financial restitution. Her smile was barely visible, but genuine. "I will consider advising if they truly wish to reform, not merely to appear reformed. As for money, it cannot restore what was lost, but it might help build something new and honest. And Anna." Giselle's expression grew thoughtful. "She was a talented student who learned the wrong lesson from my destruction. She believed that justice could be achieved through injustice, that truth could be served through deception. I will speak with her when the time is right, not to condemn, but to teach what I should have taught before." By evening, the brownstone had settled back into its proper rhythm. Fritz, having changed the locks and acquired a new offset spatula with a walnut handle, moved through his restored kitchen with renewed contentment. the violation of his domain had been addressed, order restored, and proper security measures implemented. At dinner, Wolfe examined the creme caramel Fritz had prepared with particular attention, a gentle assertion that caramel itself bore no guilt for the uses to which it had been put. As we finished the meal, he leaned back with a sigh of deep satisfaction. "The most dangerous lies, Archie," he said, reaching for his beer, "are those told in service of truth. They corrupt the very thing they claim to protect, transforming justice into vengeance, revelation into manipulation. And the moral of our caramel confession? That truth requires no embellishment to be powerful, no manipulation to be effective, and no violation of principle to be just." He paused, swirling the beer in his glass. "Also, that confessions are best written in ink rather than sugar. Ink may fade with time, but sugar dissolves under pressure, leaving only the bitter taste of regret." "Speaking of bitter tastes," I said, "Ana Delgado's revenge was perfect in its way. Patient, comprehensive, devastatingly effective. Her only mistake was believing that noble ends justified ignoble means. Indeed, she possessed the intelligence to orchestrate elaborate deception, but lacked the wisdom to understand that justice achieved through unjust methods is no justice at all." Wolfe set down his glass with finality. "Truth, like properly prepared caramel, requires honest ingredients and patient heat. Rush the process or adulterate the components, and you create something that appears sweet but tastes of deception." As I prepared to close the office for the night, I reflected on the case that had begun with a confession delivered in caramel and ended with the revelation that some recipes, for justice as well as cuisine, were too important to corrupt with artificial sweeteners or deceptive presentation. "One last thing," I said, switching off the desk lamp. "If anyone else feels compelled to confess their sins through baked goods, I'm going to suggest they try fortune cookies. At least those come with instructions." Wolfe's grunt might have been amusement or dismissal. With him, the distinction was often academic. The confession written in caramel would remain in his safe, a reminder that truth, like Fritz's exceptional cooking, was best served straight, without apology or artificial enhancement. The brownstone settled into its familiar quiet. The case closed, justice served, and dinner properly digested. In our house, that constituted the perfect resolution to any mystery, however complex or bittersweet its ingredients might have been.